RT your favorite one-dimensional proxy. A proxy is something that isn't what you're really interested in, but it's something that you can measure and put your hands on. What you're really interested in is unmeasurable, and you can't put your hands on. At risk of being crude, there are no women present. How do you measure a woman's attractiveness? You can't. You can measure a woman's bust size. That's a proxy. One-dimensional proxy for the state of the real economy. However, these are mere interpretations. The R process here comes from the stochastic representation in the theory of elliptic families, which is the subject matter of this section. And I'm an elliptical families guy. I see elliptical families everywhere. But there's more to life than elliptical families. The elliptical families are model. All models are wrong. Like your speaker said about 15 minutes ago. Some models are useful. Gentlemen, we can come back and talk about this, but let me pause. Now, from MEP, you can pick up that the variance of the x vector given the current value of the reciprocal is RT squared times the fixed matrix sigma. And so the unconditional variance is the unconditional variance of RT squared times sigma. And that gives us a simple stochastic volatility model. Think of the process R, which has a covariance structure. Now, whole books have been written about the covariance theory of stochastic processes, but I'd like you to imagine that your process, this process R, is one of your favorite stochastic processes, and think of your favorite covariance structure, and it will probably be the case that the eigenstructure of the covariance operator will be such that large values of the process tend to be followed by large values of the process because it takes time for the thing to go from large to small. And small values of the process tend to be followed by small values of the process at the same interval. And what this picks up on in this particular case is called volatility clustering. And this is one of the standardized facts, as they're called, in mathematical finance. Volatility clustering. The world, the economy, goes through different phases. It goes through phases of euphoria, and everybody's happy. There are a lot of young men here, but I remember life pre-Greenspan. And then Greenspan arrived on the scene, and for many years, what seemed like an eternity, Mr. Greenspan was the world's favourite central banker. And everybody involved in high finance seemed to be getting better all the time. Let the good times roll. God save our gracious Greenspan, may our gracious Greenspan reign over us forever. Well, he didn't. Eventually he retired. And immediately the roof fell. Subprime mortgages, 2007, US economy. And it didn't really hit us over here until 2008 when we had the Northern Rock crisis, which I've mentioned already. And then in 2008, Lehman Brothers was about to go bust, and so on and so forth. Let's come back and talk more about these wonderful events later if we have time. Now then, we have a stochastic process here with two bits to it, the parametric bit and the non-parametric bit. Sorry,
So
Yes, sir.
you had volatility. So your point is generally volatility is small. And if you could predict, is there something to say about volatility if you can predict major crashes like 2007?
No.
Or are you just, is that just sort of a fun thing to talk about?
I've never actually flipped one of these things before. Now I have an excuse to try my hand with a little bit of art. That's volatility plus. Where you have a crisis, markets get excited. You know very well, sir, we all know, that there are only two things that get markets moving big time are fear and greed. When the cumulative effect of these rather unedified human notions produces something really nasty, people lose money. People don't like losing money. People get nervous when they just lost money. When they're nervous, they're like this. Then eventually, they think to themselves, oh, well, I'm still alive, unlike Johnny next door who went bankrupt. What do? You buy up Johnny next door's bankrupt business. Survival is victory. Have you ever read January, sir? You should. How many of you have read January? It's about a miners' strike in late 19th century France, and the hero is a trade union representative. And the strike goes on long enough for miners' families to start dying of starvation. But eventually, some of the mines go out of business. Immediately, the surviving mines buy up the bankrupt stock for nothing. And this elicits a grudging aberration in the mind of the hero, who marvels at the strength of the beast that even in defeat could feed upon the fallen bodies of his comrades. Very impressive. Right. Here, these are happy times. Right? You know, one of the Greenspan periods, and that's a crisis period. And this rather childish little sketch is meant to illustrate volatility plus. You get this manic depressive alternation between happy periods and crisis periods. Yes?
But I guess that's it depends on the scales that you're looking at, because within, if you look at this at the larger window, this small period, this crisis period now might look something totally part of a nice period. So you can't really.
I'm going to. In the long run, we are all dead.
Yes.
Lord Clemens. Everything depends on the window. Everything depends on what you see. It depends on the degree of detail in which you are looking. Have you ever seen pictures from Robert Hooke's microcosmic reflection? Hooke was the first person. Hooke was the first person in the news who used a microscope fine enough to give a detailed sight on a fly's eye. And only at that time did people work out why flies are so difficult to swat. You swat a fly, and it sees you coming, and flies contemptuously away, and you end up by whacking thin air or what the fly was just sitting. Do you remember, well actually you're bearded, the clean-shaven men here. Do you remember when you first started shaving? I remember I was given a shaving mirror. And I think it's a concave mirror. And you look at your face in the shaving mirror and it doesn't look like you. It is you, but it's not the you that you see, unless you're blowing the thing up artificially. These days, with computer graphics, you can talk to students about selecting, zooming in and blowing up, and zooming in and blowing up. So it's quite fun, actually. I teach Brownian motion, and what I say to them is, the thing about Brownian motion is, you zoom in, you blow up, you zoom in, you blow up, you zoom in, you blow up, you blow up. What does it look like? It looks like a Brownian motion. Whereas anything else, if you zoom in and blow up there, it's going to look straight because it's got a tangent. So, I hear what you say, but that's my answer to you, because I'm under pressure.
Okay.
There's a question possibly that is it fractile? Is volatility clustering fractali in nature?
Oh, what a lovely question. What a lovely question.
Depends on the model.
The short answer is I don't know, but the longer answer is I think it's a very intriguing question. Certainly fractional Brownian motion has been used for modelling purposes here, and fractional Brownian motion is indeed fractal. What a lovely question. You see, this is the nice thing about saying yes when people ask you to talk, because you yes some questions. I've never thought of the question about that. Let me just get on, then we can come back and talk more on the questions. We've got these two bits of the model test. We've got the parametric bit, and we need to estimate it. Now, estimating means is actually harder than you think. There is a phenomenon called mean blur, and I believe the term is due to Robert Merton in 1980. I met it from the book by Leuenberger, which I think is called Investment Science. And you wouldn't think it, but estimating means is harder than you think. It's much harder than estimating variances. And estimating means is so difficult to do that, in my opinion, you should always work robustly. One gadget that is used here is the Ojar needle. My talk will remain available, sir, so you can catch it on.
Yes, thank you. It's also being videoed, you know.
Is it really? Oh, great.
Maybe we should have told you before.
That's all right. That's all right.
Thanks. So,
Well, I'm not. I think he's finished.
Yeah,
Yeah, yes. Okay. Yes, same guy. Same guy. Yeah.
Independent component analysis.
Yes.
I see. Independent component analysis.
Oh, he's done all sorts of stuff.
And heavy money rule too.
I should have written down some references here on that. So far as estimating the volatility, the covariance matrix sigma is concerned, again, I'm a great believer in proceeding robustly. I'm very keen on affine equivariance, which I could talk about at length, but we haven't got time. I won't attempt to pronounce this interesting name, which presumably is from the Baltic Republic somewhere, but I can have, that's Rousseau. Peter Rousseau, and that's Annals of Statistics in 1991. Estimation of the non-parametric part. Well, we're dealing with multivariate elliptic processes, and are you a diffusion person or are you a Naive person? Now, I'm a probabilist, and probabilists tend to split. In an ideal world, one would be equally comfortable in the diffusion world or the latent process world. Well, no, none of the probabilists I know it's like football. Are you left-footed or right-footed? I happen to be left-handed, and when I played football, I was left-footed. I used to play left-back. I've got one son who is handed one way and footed the other way. Never remember which way around it is. So this is me with my wrong foot on, this is me with my right foot on down here. If R is an algorithmic diffusion, then you can estimate the stationary density from the relevant quadratic form, which we talked about before, and density estimation methods, and indeed there's an entire book, monograph treatment of this sort of problem by Matthias statistical inference for ergodic diffusion processes. On the other hand, if you like Levy processes, you may prefer to use a self-decomposable model. I haven't got too much time to talk about self-decomposability, except that SD for self-decomposable, and for those of you who handle time series, AR1, autoregressive or 1, is the model, is the acronym to write down. These are the limit laws as t tends to infinity of solutions of stochastic differential equations of Ornstein-Uhlenbeck type. Now, the classical Ornstein-Uhlenbeck stochastic differential equation has a Brownian motion there as the driving process, but if you have a non-decreasing Levy process, positive Levy process, you get something more general. And there's a lot known about this. There's a monograph on everything in sight by Sato, with very good treatments of this in 2 different parts of the book. And for the relevant estimation theory, this is one of the areas of specialization of the Netherlands School of Statistics, and in particular, this man, Jonwood. Okay. Right. Prediction in general and Segre theory. Now, I'm down to speak from 2 to 4. So, I've given no thought to how the time was progressing. It's now a little after 3. What I will aim to do is to speak for another 20 or 30 minutes, and then we can have time for questions, or we can split early. Is that okay, friends? Good. Okay. Right, prediction in general and Segre. Now, the basis of the prediction theory of stationary time series, which I happen to love mathematically, is the Kolmogorov isomorphism theorem, or KIT, and you'll find treatments of this, this is Kolmogorov in 1941 in Russian. I have his selected works, and indeed his selected works have been translated into English by Kluver, I think, but it's hideously expensive and I haven't got that, whereas I was given his selected works in Russian by Albert Shiryaev. And there are treatments of the scalar and vector case in my 2 surveys that I mentioned. There is a random measure y on the unit circle. That is the unit circle, the one-dimensional torus, T for torus. Inside is the unit disk D, and all around is the lovely, wonderful, complex plane C. So, the torus, there's an angle here. The typical angle on the unit circle is theta, and so Fourier methods are going to come in. There's a random measure y on the unit circle with orthogonal increments, which means that the change in y over this interval and the change in y over that interval have zero correlation with each other. And this process is called the Cremier process, or the spectral process. The book by Cremier and Ledbetter has a nice textbook treatment of it. And there's a probability measure M on unit circle T. That should be nice T like this, I'm sorry. The spectral measure and isomorphism. X of T, the value of our process at time T, mapping to and fro from E to the prime T point, and E to the prime T point itself, that's an angle theta into E to the prime T point. So that's the angle, and that's the time. Right. Between the Hilbert spaces H, the L2 space of the X process, and L2M, the L2 space of the spectral measure, which map between the time domain on the left, time domain here, and the spectral domain on the right, frequency domain on the right, same thing. Back home, I have two books that I rescued when Brunel University, when Sergei and I were colleagues there, was throwing away its library store. And the academic staff were invited to go along to the library store in Twickenham and buy any books we wanted for 50p a time. So I went along and I bought a lot of books for 50p a time. I got chatting to one of the librarians who was nearly in tears, a very nice woman. And she said, come Monday, we're going to have to throw everything left out. So I said, no, that's cruel. And so we practically went on each other's shoulders. And she ended up by saying to me, why didn't you come back on Monday and help yourself? So I went back on Monday and I helped myself to hundreds of books, which I still got, including 2 volumes of the Handbook of Statistics published by North Holland. One is called Time Domain and the other is called Frequency. Okay. Time domain here x of t, frequency domain here y of theta, and stochastic representation again linking one with the other. And those of you who know stochastic calculus or Ito calculus will recognize the link between the last equation there and dB of t on the squared, where b is Brownian motion, equals dt, which is the heart and soul of Ito calculus. It's all the same stuff. It just looks different. Okay.
So is SR there for spectral resolution? What does it mean, SR? SR in the equation there is
It's spectral representation.
R spectral representation.
S. Spectral just means to do with the spectrum. Sorry. I was thinking spectral measure, and I meant to write spectral representation.
But isn't it that for the signal, you actually have to take Fourier transform on the square of the signal, not the signal? So in I'm trying to see which spectrum you're talking about. Because there are different...
Let's scroll back to... Yes?
For example, there is a spectral measure which is related to the spectrum of the signal, which is Fourier transform of the squared signal. Not anyway,
I'm a probabilist, and it sounds to me as if you have more of a background in electrical engineering.
No. It's Stepanovich, stochastic status.
Ooh, I hadn't expected that we would get into Stepanovich matters today.
I just didn't recognize this kind of spectrum. Just as I was curious why. This is just Fourier transform.
It's the Fourier transform that drives everything. Right, yes.
So there is also a Fourier transform not of y, but of y times the conjugate y.
Yes.
That's what I was talking about. Or x, the inverse would be the transform of x squared.
You're raising interesting thoughts which are new to me and which I can't resolve in real time.
Because there are many different spectrums, I just was wanting to see which one is that.
Wheels within wheels within wheels. Let's come back to this later. Okay. Now the ACF and the PCF, I propose to skip over this with indecent haste. The autocorrelation function is just the sequence of Fourier coefficients of the spectral measure and is the usual parametrization of the process. The partial autocorrelation function is different and I much prefer it. And this is the correlation between the residuals at time 0 and n regressed on the values between in the language of regression. For those of you who know time series, you can see how different these are because the ACF cuts off from the moving average model and the partial ACF cuts off from an aggressive model. The lovely thing about the PACF is that it gives you an unrestricted parameterization. All values in the unit disk are possible, and the set of all sequences alpha with values in the unit disk is in 1-1 correspondence with the possible spectral measures. A lovely result called the Blunsky's theorem, which was derived in analysis in the 30s and rediscovered in statistics in the 70s, would you believe it? And for those of you who are in time series, the PACF is the sequence of diagonal entries in the infinite triangular matrix cropping up in the Levinson-Durbin algorithm. A couple of references here, the books by Barry Simon, which are tough going but good stuff, and the books by Hannon and colleagues on frequency methods in time series. Sega's theorem is lovely mathematics, but I think I'm going to cut it, except that I will, why don't I just write a little bit down using this nice flip chart. I never thought I'd use flip charts, but actually quite fun. So we've got the spectral measure. M, does it have a density? Well, maybe it does, in which case M will have a density bit which we will call W theta. D theta over 2 pi is normalized to vague measure, plus a singular. Let's not worry about the singular. You can make the singular bit go away. So W here is the spectral density. We're looking at a time series which is stationary. So it goes way back in time. How far back in time? Well, when did God create the universe? Way, way, way back in time. Does the remote past matter or not? Whether or not the remote past matters depends on whether the logarithm of the spectral density is integral. So finite or not. Now, I don't know what your physics is like, but whenever you see the logarithm of the density, the word that should go through your minds is entropy. I gave a talk in this area back at Birkbeck, where I worked in the late 90s and where I was professor of statistics at the time. And an old friend of mine who was a physics professor turned up, didn't know the background, but when I got to this point, of course, he said out loud, that is obviously an entropy, and indeed it is an entropy. Lurking in the background is a thing called the Gibbs variation principle, which is all good stuff. So let's skip over the details here. Suffice it to say that the relevant mathematics here goes back to Sager around 1920 to Kolmogorov around 1941. And to actually do the mathematics here, we need the machinery of Hardy spaces, which is all very interesting stuff, but we'll just have to skip this out. Discrete versus continuous time. Is time discrete or continuous? Well, it's both. If you wear a digital watch, which I do, then we experience time discretely if you look at the watch. If you wear a watch with a sweep second hand, you can look at it and you'll see the thing jumping every second because of the clock. But in an ideal watch with a sweep second hand would perform a simple Harmonic motion. Really expensive Japanese watches do that. They really do. And you can tell which are real ones and which ones are copies because the copies visibly jump and the real ones just. So is time discrete or continuous? And it's nice to be able to go back and forth between the two. which you can do using the stochastic representation and the white process that we had before, just by going between time n, natural number, and time t, real number, and just replace n by t. That's it, no problem. And lurking in the background here is a thing called the sampling theorem. Now, I don't know whether you've come across the sampling theorem before, but the sampling theorem is like it. And the sampling theorem says the following. We have a signal in continuous time, and we observe the signal every so often, in discrete time, certain intervals. When can one recover the whole signal in continuous time just from its discrete time values? And the answer is you can do it under certain circumstances, which we haven't time into, if you sample often enough, but not if you don't sample often enough. What is the minimum rate that's often enough? It's called the Nyquist rate, and lurking in the background here is the sampling theorem. Now, there has been an enormous amount of work in the time series literature in recent years looking at things like armour and gauge, which are discrete time, and doing rather artificial mathematics to get continuous versions of them. And there are some good people doing it, but in my opinion, it's rather misses the point. One should do the sort of thing we've been talking about here. And by the way, before I forget to mention this, I used to think that econometrics was a subject done in discrete time. Econometrics is not a subject done in discrete time. It's a subject that can and probably should be done in continuous time. And this we owe to, among others, the great econometrician Rex Bergstrom, whom I'm sorry to say I never met. My wife has a colleague who's a pupil of his. Stationarity versus non-stationarity. Time's getting on, we haven't got time to go into this much. But I want to feed into your thinking the name of the late Sir Clive Granger, whom I corresponded in the last year of his life, and the phenomenon of spurious regression. Imagine that you are a politician, gentlemen, and you have to take decisions on macroeconomic policy. What do? You consult your experts. You will need expert statisticians. If your expert statisticians are using statistical methods which make tacit assumptions of stationarity and you apply them in non-stationary situations, you can get very misleading conclusions. That's spurious regression for you. And this used to result in mistakes being made in macroeconomic policy for basically statistical reasons. And Granger's life work was devoted to making sure that didn't happen. Okay. Well, I've skipped over the technicalities, but I'm not really a technicalities man. I'm really a big picture man. If you want more detail, gentlemen, let's go back to the beginning and refer you to, oh, I need to do it quickly, won't I? Yeah. If you want more detail, there's plenty more detail. It's not so much that you need to look at my stuff, you don't, but if you want leads into literature, you will find that there are lots and lots of references